Welcome to episode 2 of the Devlog series for my VR game, which I'm currently calling Being Giant. I first want to take just a second to say thank you for the amazing response to the first episode. It has been really encouraging to see the positive feedback that I've been getting, and has been driving me to work harder on the game, so thank you for the likes and comments on that first video. As I stated in the first video, this is the first devlog series that I have ever done, so I'm not entirely sure what kind of content I should be putting in these. I figured for now I will just give an overview of the specific things that I have done since the last video, so I'll give that a try here. The first thing I did after the last video was make a Trello board for the game. I have been watching a lot of other devlogs to get an idea of what I should do with these videos, and it seems like a lot of developers are using Trello to track their development. I didn't really have a system in place, I just used a random assortment of notes in a notebook, so I figured I would give this a try. And it seems to be going alright at this point, nothing too fancy. The next thing that I worked on was implementing the next, and what will probably be the last harvestable resource in the game, metal. Currently the game has 3 resources that can be harvested from the world: wood, stone, and now metal. I'm not intending on giving the metal a specific name such as copper or iron to avoid the inevitable comments of "you can't make that type of thing with that type of metal." I just want to have a generic metal that I can use for all sorts of different things in the game. Because of that, one of my goals was to make it look somewhat mysterious and not be easily identifiable as a specific metal, yet still be identifiable as some type of metal. As I briefly mentioned before, I am using a bunch of temporary assets in an attempt to keep my development costs as low as possible in these early stages. And I think the combination that I came up with to create this metal resource node is a great example of that. I have several low poly asset packs that I have gotten for cheap or free from the Unreal Marketplace, but they don't have everything that I need, so sometimes I have to get creative with the assets that I do have. For the shape of the metal resource node, I wanted a somewhat amorphous blob on the ground. The static mesh that I ended up using was originally intended to be a low poly pile of dirty laundry. It's odd, but it has pretty much the exact shape that I was aiming for. I obviously had to change the material, and I wanted something grayish and shiny to make it completely distinct from the stone resource node. Scrolling through the materials I had, I came across a basic water material that ended up being perfect when applied to the pile of dirty laundry. It gives it the gray/dark base color that I wanted, with a decent shine effect that makes it completely different to the stone. I know that I keep saying that these are all temporary assets, but I might actually keep this combination for the final version because it is pretty much exactly what I had envisioned originally. I haven't implemented the actual metal ore or anything to do with the metal yet, but having the resource node is a step in the right direction. After that, I decided I wanted to revamp some parts of the core mechanics that I had set up originally to just get them working, and that needed proper, or at least better, implementations. I started with the harvesting system. Previously, when a worker or the player was harvesting a node, they would all deal damage to the node on a combined health figure, and the last person, worker or player, to deal damage before the health dropped to 0 was the one that actually spawned in the resource. This worked alright, but it could cause some weird issues, such as a high-leveled worker that does lots of damage but doesn't ever actually get the last hit on the node, so it doesn't seem like that worker is actually producing any resources. I turned that system around, so now each worker gets the max health of the node that they are harvesting and just deals damage to that health figure internally and creates the resource when they deplete that number. Then it resets and they do it again. I left the original system in place, just now only the player is the one that deals damage to the resource node's internal health. This seems fine for now, but I may have to come back and change this in the future. The new harvesting system for the workers made it much easier to implement the next improvement, which was resource stacking. Previously, when a worker spawned in a resource, it was just created at their resource spawn point and that was it. So you could end up with what looked like one log, for example, but it was actually 10 or 20 or however many number of overlapping logs. This again worked fine, but it was potentially confusing, and if a worker was left alone to harvest at a resource node for enough time, it could spawn in enough actors to start causing performance issues. I have now given each resource a value, which represents the specific number of that resource that it represents. So if a worker has a log already spawned at their resource spawning point, instead of creating a new log, it will just increment the value of that log. This also works if you place multiple workers next to each other. If their resource spawn points are close enough together, they will combine their resources together. This is a much cleaner system in my opinion. I can also alter the static mesh of the resource to visually represent that there is more than one of the specific resource being represented. In order for this to work properly, I had to change the way that a player grabs a resource slightly. Now, instead of just attaching the resource to the player's hand, it first checks the value of the resource, and if it is greater than 1, it decrements the value of that resource and spawns in a new copy of the resource to attach that to the player's hand. There were a couple bugs with this initially, but I got them all worked out in the end. With each resource having its own value now, I wanted to make it so that as a worker levels up, they're able to carry more than one of their specified resource. This required a reworking of the leveling system as well, which was on the Trello board anyway, so I figured I would tackle this next. The old leveling system just gave each worker a single level that would increment over time as they performed tasks. This meant that a worker that was assigned as a gatherer and had leveled up would automatically be a better harvester as well if they were assigned to be a harvester. This didn't really make sense, so I have now given the workers 2 levels, one for their harvesting and one for their gathering. Harvesting and gathering being the only 2 tasks that a worker can be given. It's a simple fix, but now I can say if a worker has a gathering level of greater than, say, level 3, they not only walk faster, but they can carry 2 items at a time as well. With the new stacking system, this just required the worker to check the value of the resource that they overlap, and if the value is less than or equal to their max carry amount, they just pick it up like normal, and if the value is greater than their max carry amount, they spawn in a new copy and set its value to their max carry amount and decrement the original resource's value by their max carry amount. With these changes to the value of a resource, I needed to change the way that the buildings take in resources as well. Instead of just destroying the resource and incrementing their internal count of how many resources they have, they now have to check the value of the resource and increment their count by that amount and then destroy the resource. This was a fairly simple change to implement since I already had a function to increase the internal inventory count that already took in an integer value representing the amount to increase by. I was just always setting that to a value of 1, and now it just has to pull that figure from the value of the resource. That is about it for the changes for this devlog. Hopefully this video wasn't too long. Again, I would appreciate it if you left some feedback in the comments, especially if you watched all the way to this point. As always, thanks very much for watching this episode, and if you found this video or the game itself to be interesting, please consider subscribing to keep up with future content, and I will see you all in the next episode.